Well, we already know there's a whole lot of things discussed within the walls of the White House that we don't know about. But it seems there are a series of secret wars being waged as part of a program started by President George W. Bush and continued with vigor by President Obama. It's called the Olympic Games, and one example of this came in the form of a cyber worm that outsiders actually referred to as Stuxnet. This was sent into Iran a couple years ago to disrupt certain aspects of their nuclear program. Well, it turns out the U.S. and Israel were behind that. They developed it and carried out the attack. Are you surprised? Well, you shouldn't be, because we've been telling you this for more than a year now. But now David Sanger of the New York Times is saying it as well. Now, this article, it was published today. It says it appears to be the first time the United States has repeatedly used cyber weapons to cripple another country's infrastructure, achieving with computer code what until then could be accomplished only by bombing a country or sending agents in to plant explosives. So we want to talk about not just these cyber attacks, but also about the message that we've been hearing from those on the inside, a message very different, it turns out, from what's actually been happening. Let's go now to Barrett Brown, founder of Project PM and one of our cyber experts. Hey there, Barrett. I guess let me first just get your reaction to the news that the U.S. government has been behind several cyber attacks, including Stuxnet.
Well, this is one of those things that was very widely just considered to be the case ever since Stuxnet appeared and was identified. We're seeing a similar situation with the new Flame, whereby it's already being hypothesized that, this is probably another U.S.-oriented capability. Things like this obviously were a long time coming, and there's going to be arguments, reasonable arguments, in favor of them, in so much as that what we're seeing obviously is a new means of warfare that doesn't involve violence. It's not going to have any civilian casualties, and no bombs going astray. And of course, it's hard to get excited. It's hard to get that upset about a liberal democracy like the U.S. taking out the nuclear capabilities of what's essentially still a pseudo-theocracy of Iran. The problem is that this is just one aspect of the cyber capabilities that are being sought and developed, not just by the U.S. within its own internal sort of mechanisms, but also by a number of parties outside, a number of contractors, for instance, and of course other states that are a little bit less straightforward than something like this, where you're just taking out nuclear machinery.
Well, I want to play something too for you. This is an interview in July of last year. This is one of our RT correspondents interviewing Eugene Kaspersky, a security software mogul. Let's take a look.
Are cyber wars between nations like a reality already, and we don't know about that?
We have just one incident, and we have this information from, well, I personally have this information from two sources. First of all, that's a malicious code, the virus itself, and from the news, because secret services or nuclear power plants people, they don't report me. So then from the code I see that this is a very complicated, very sophisticated malicious code. That's a very big project. I think there was a group of high-end experts to design that.
So back then it was high-end experts who designed it. Now it's confirmed that it was in fact the U.S. and Israel. Do you think this will have an impact on future attacks?
Well, the fact that it seems to have had an effect, approaching what they wanted it to be, I think that will obviously encourage other actors and the U.S. as well to continue with these same kind of attacks. And that's something that was inevitable. I mean, to the extent that other individual parties militarize cyberspace, to the extent that there's, you have botnets, you have, 0 days, all these other sort of malware by which to get into other people's computers. I mean, it's even something that's hard for someone like me to criticize when the U.S. does it. I mean, it's only fair that they'd be able to. Again, though, one of the problems here, even with these kind of conventional straightforward attacks, is that it further detaches the active warfare from the citizenry. As in, these kind of things are obviously done in a covert fashion, whereby you have a certain government, even a liberal democracy, waging a certain kind of war against another government, and then the citizenry sort of has to sort of guess as to what's happening. And then eventually, years later, it'll be confirmed in the New York Times and the Washington Post when certain sources decide it's time to confirm it. And that's something that I don't think we need when already we have a situation in which war is no longer declared by the U.S., you already have the executive branch sort of taking that on its own part. And of course, we have a long history in the U.S. and other countries of waging forms of war in a clandestine fashion as well, more conventional warfare. So it just sort of adds to what's already a problem with a government that draws its officialdom and its power allegedly from the citizenry, continuing to act in ways that are actually only decided by a few people behind closed doors.
I think that's a really important point. Certainly things are changing immensely when we talk about these wars. Before, it was always face-to-face. It was men on the ground, boots on the ground combat. Now we see more and more, people using remote controls. They're using drones to kill hundreds of people at one time, but they don't have to deal, sort of with the impact of it, to see it firsthand because it's being done thousands of miles away. And to an extent, the same thing can be said about this cyber warfare. Something that was interesting to me, though, is, based on what many of our leaders have been telling us, we should be afraid of other countries doing this to us. Let me play a few examples here.
A weapon of mass disruption.
You could have a cyber attack that would be as consequential in terms of the economy and maybe even in terms of loss of life as things we typically associate with war fighting.
Next Pearl Harbor that we confront could very well be a cyber attack that cripples our power systems, our grid.
Acts of terror could come not only from a few extremists in suicide vests, but from a few keystrokes on the computer.
So, Barrett, you said a few minutes ago, it's hard to criticize the government for doing this, that they should be able to. But it isn't hard for me to say, isn't this a little bit, hypocritical to look at the government constantly telling us we need more cybersecurity laws, we need more cybersecurity funding because we need to protect the U.S., and yet they're the ones that are going out and doing this in other countries?
Well, yeah, I mean, most of the people in that clip that you just showed are massive liars in their public service. I mean, that's just part of the course, obviously. There is a legitimate threat and a legitimate, I would say, recourse that the U.S. has to engage in vis-a-vis China or even other worse governments that do still exist. Having said that, I mean, this whole thing with these straightforward attacks of this sort are, again, one issue that is going to come to the forefront, is going to be widely discussed, while at the same time, there are other capabilities that have more to do with, of course, surveillance and also with propaganda and manipulation that are slowly being developed and are sort of, among, again, not just the government, its own machinery, but also outsiders contracted by the government, which are far more concerning to me, partly because they're also very indetectable. They're designed in order to be able to be used without anyone being the wiser. And they tend to strike not at infrastructure, but at information, such ways as to undermine proper information or to sort of to strangle it in its crib in certain ways. And we've seen examples, very early examples, of what this will consist of. Most of that comes out of the H.B. Gary emails, which eventually led to the discovery that CENTCOM is using these persona management devices in the foreign theaters. And of course, the U.S. government claims they would never use that on U.S. citizens to be illegal, but at the same time, we don't need to look far for instances of overreach.
And certainly we're seeing right now, both in Congress with this asking for more funding and in the courts with the executive branch asking for more protection, saying they shouldn't have to abide by these rules because what they've done and what they're doing is in the name of national security. And Barrett Brown, founder of Project PM, always good to have you on the show.
Thank you.